Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today, Dave, I have myself, Mighty Pete, and we have the Dave Coombs. Good afternoon to you, sir. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening.
Well, good day. How about that?
Oh, good.
It's
That's
just good. It's good to be here, Pete.
listen, it's fantastic. So to give our audience a bit of background, so Dave Coombs is a songwriter, photographer, entrepreneur, and author with 4 decades of experience, writing over 120 songs and creating 14 albums of soothing, relaxing instrumental piano music. His songwriting began with the now popular standard, Rachel's Song. His soothing, relaxing music has been played millions of times worldwide on radio, satellite, and all internet streaming media, and it comes to touch the lives of millions of people all over the world. He is also the author of the best-selling new book, Touched by the Music: How the Story and Music of Rachel's Songs Can Change Your Life. Welcome to the show. It's awesome to have you on, Dave. Thank you so much for taking the time out today to come and speak to us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is going to be fun and interesting and hopefully entertaining.
Well, there you go. There you go. So let's start off with an easy one. What's your fire in the belly, Dave?
Well, my fire in the belly, I guess, since I wrote Rachel's Song, has been to spread my music as far and as wide around the world as I possibly can. Having written now over 120 songs, 14 albums of music over the past 41 years, my mission now is to spread that music as far and as wide as I can, because yeah, it's true that millions of people have heard my music already, but there are billions of people who have not. And I know from all the letters and notes that I've gotten over the years, of which they number over 50,000, that my music touches people. And that's where the title of my book came from, was all these people that wrote to me to say how touched they were by my music. They didn't know me, I did not know them. My music has no words, it's instrumental, and yet it somehow deeply touches and moves people. So my really fire in my belly has to do with really keeping my music alive and out there and introducing it to as many people as I can. And my favorite medium these days is through podcasts, just like this one.
Wow. How, when you get that music out, and what does it do for you personally? What difference does it make? Is it the feedback? Is it just knowing that it's out there, in the ether? What is it about it, Dave?
I think it's the feedback that I get and have gotten over the years confirms that it really does make a connection between me and the person that's listening to it. And the degree to which it affects people in a positive and meaningful way is what really is so special to me, is that connection and that affirmation of the good that the music has been able to do. And even though I've only heard from 50,000, it sounds like a lot of people, but in the scheme of things, 50,000 and the billions of people on the earth is not a lot. But still, if that's a good sampling, then I know from those that there are people who they're hurting either psychologically or physically, and my music has helped relieve their pain, or at least take their mind off of it, to give them something else pleasant to think about. People that are stressed out, I think for years we've heard that stress is the silent killer. People with a lot of stress tend to have more heart attacks and other ailments that are not good for them. So anything to relieve your stress and help you calm down has got to be good for you. And so my music seems to do that. And so it touches all ages too. I've had music that little babies have been born to my music. I've had people depart this life to my music. They've been listening to my music as they passed away. And everything in between, people getting married to the music, people enjoying my music on their vacations and trips with their family, little kids that are hard to get to calm down and go to sleep. I've gotten letters from people who said, well, I just put Rachel's Song CD on and little Johnny just seems to curl up and just go right to sleep, no problem. So, there's all of those, some touching and some funny anecdotal stories about how the music really does, in fact, touch people's lives.
It's amazing, isn't it? The fact that the impact and the ripples it can make, and as you say, for the people that, for everyone that you hear of, it must be hazard a guess and say there's 100 or 1,000 that you don't hear of, more. Who knows, right?
That's right.
And you were saying you've been doing this over four decades?
Yes, I wrote Rachel's song, the music to it, in January of 1981. So that's what 41 years ago and counting. And I was 33 years old when that happened. And I had grown up in a musical family around music all my life. I'd been active in church music and with the choir. I'd been a choir director before. And I, of course, played the piano. Both my parents played the piano. My grandmother Combs, she played music, and a lot of my friends were musical. So it was something I just grew up around all of my life. And it wasn't until I was 33 years old that I wrote that first tune. And I didn't really sit down to write it. For those of you watching the podcast, there's a piano behind me here, my Steinway grand piano. But I love to sit down at my piano in the evening when I was working during the day for a large corporation. I'd come home and just to de-stress, I'd sit down at the piano and just play something. And that seemed to just take my mind off of anything that was bothering me or whatever. You just kind of get lost in the music. And that evening I sat down and I played this song, this tune. And I didn't really think about it, Pete, as being writing a song. I just sat down and I played it. And it was a great, simple song, very beautiful chord progression, and it just fit together and it never changed. I never really had to fiddle with it or anything. It was just, I played it and it never changed. And a couple of days later, my wife comes home from work and she says, "Dave, what's the name of this song I've been humming in my head all day long? You play it on the piano all the time, and what's the name of it?" She hummed a little bit of it, and I said, "It doesn't have a name, Linda." And she says, "Doesn't?" Well, I said, "I just made it up. It's just something I made up." Well, she got all excited and said, "Well, have you written it down?" I said, No, I'm not going to forget it. It's permanently emboldened in my brain here." And she said, "Oh, no, something might happen to you, and that song would be gone." So she said, "You better write it down." I said, "Okay, yes, ma'am." So I wrote down the notes and the chords on a piece of paper and put it in my piano bench. And I would play the song every once in a while. And we tried to come up with a name for it because it was a pretty tune, but nothing we ever decided we wanted to name it fit the song. So roll the calendar forward 2 years, and some friends of ours had a little baby girl named Rachel. And they asked me and Linda to be her godparents. And of course, we accepted. And at Rachel's christening service, we were just us and the family and the minister, and we're sitting there through the formal part of the service. And up at the front of the church, on the platform, is a baby grand piano. And so I look at that piano, and toward the end of the service, I punched Linda and I said, "Hey, what do you think about me playing this tune now at the end of the service?" She said, "That's a great idea." So I went up to the family and the minister and said, "Would it be okay if I played a song on the piano?" And they said, "Sure." So everybody sat back down, and I went over to the piano and sat down, and I started playing this tune. And I got most of the way through it, and I hear out in the audience some clearing the throat and some sniffles going on, and I noticed that my eyes were starting to get a little bit moist too. And you know, if you've ever been to a baby's christening service or something like that, you know how tender and it is anyway. And so it's like going to a sad movie, and then the music starts, and then it really just makes it really go. Well, the music just really apparently turned all the emotions on high. And so at the end of the song, I looked over at little Rachel in the arms of her mother, and I said, "From now on, this song is going to be called Rachel's Song in her honor." And that's how it got its name, Pete.
That's beautiful. To have the emotion and the song and the connection and everything else, it's so powerful, right?
Yes. And you know, then you talk about that, like the fire in the belly name of your podcast. I think that was the spark, really, that event that gave me what later became a bonfire or a wildfire in my belly, if you will, because it took on a life of its own. You know, after the christening service, of course, I played Rachel's song for a lot of play for ourselves and whatever. But then I was doing a lot of work with Western Electric, the company I worked for, and I was having to travel a lot. One of the places that I was having to travel to was Nashville, Tennessee. Well, Nashville, Tennessee is Music City, USA. It's everything there. It seems to be related to music. And so my wife, Linda, again, it seems like everything happens because my wife says, you need to think about doing this. You may not have ever experienced that before, but it's all these good ideas are her ideas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Love it.
So she says, well, while you're in Nashville, why don't you see about getting a professional recording made of Rachel's song? Something we could enjoy and have to let the family listen to too. So I said, okay. So one evening after I'm off work, I'm driving around downtown Nashville looking for a studio that I could check out get a recording made of Rachel's song. And I'm in a part of town called Music Square. If you've been to Nashville, you know there's a part of town that has the Country Music Hall of Fame and RCA studio, the one that you can go on a tour, and then there's ASCAP headquarters and BMI headquarters and a bunch of studios, everything musical. So I'm driving down this one little side street. It's called Roy Acuff Place. Now, folks that may remember that Roy Acuff was a very famous and much loved musician in Nashville, Tennessee. He was great, big, very famous on the Grand Ole Opry, and just Roy Acuff was a great person. They named the street after him. So I'm going down Roy Acuff Place, and at the end of the street, here's this big building with a kind of a barn-shaped roof to it, and out front, near the street, is this great big a great big mill, the wheel, you know, the mill wheel where they used to grind corn and whatever. So I looked around, and on the side of the building, the sign said the music mill. So they obviously took the mill as a good symbol for their studios. Great, something you won't forget. So I went around the corner and parked in the parking lot, and sure enough, there through the glass door in the lobby, I could see a man sitting at a desk. So I knock on the door, and he unlocks it and opens it and says, "Hi, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking for a studio." And he said, "Well, come on in." And as I stepped in the door in this lobby, it was a 2-story, big, tall lobby. Over here on the left was this great big life-size picture of Glenn Campbell. And right in front of me was this great big wide panorama picture of the group Alabama. And then over here was the Forrester Sisters, and then there were gold records and platinum records framed all around the walls. You know, you got the picture. It's kind of like looking behind you with all those books back there. If all those were gold records and everything, you would really be impressed. So I thought, wow. And so George says, "Well, this is a studio." And I said, "Well, I've never been in one before." And he said, "Well, how about I give you a tour of the place?" I said, "That'd be great." So he said, "Nobody's recording right now, so let's go over into Studio A, the big studio." Okay, so I go into the big recording room. Big room. You could put an orchestra in that room. I mean, it probably was designed to record an orchestra. And over in the back corner was a concert grand piano and, you know, isolation rooms around the perimeter. And he said, "Let's go over into the control room where all the magic happens." So he opens this big, thick, soundproof door about 8 inches thick into the control room. And we go in there, and first thing I see is this console. The thing must have been about 8 feet long. I later learned it probably had at least 32 tracks. So it was a long console with sliders and knobs and switches and lights. And I told George, I said, "Wow, you could launch a spaceship from in here, it looks like." And around the wall was tape recording machines and digital recorders, and up on the wall and through the big glass window, soundproof, where you could look out into where the musicians were. Big speakers, what they call them, monitor speakers, where you could listen to the music. And I said, "Wow, George, how much does a place like this rent for?" He says, "Well, it's $125 an hour plus engineer." Now remember, this was 1986. So in today's dollars, $125 an hour would probably be over $400 an hour today. And so I guess George saw how disappointed I was in that figure, because that was obviously a lot more money than I made. He said, well, don't worry, Dave. The fellow who owns this studio owns another one across the street. It's a tiny little studio in a little small house, what used to be a rent house. And he said, that one is $15 an hour plus engineer. And I said, okay, exactly. I can do that. Yes, I can. Okay. All right, George, now what I need is a musician to arrange and play my song for me. I need a really wonderful piano player. He thought for a second, and he says, I know just the person for you. He said his name is Gary Prim, P-R-I-M. I've known Gary all my life. We go to church together. He's a wonderful session musician. Everybody loves Gary. So I said, okay. He said, well, let's go back to my desk and I'll get his phone number for you. So he wrote Gary's phone number on a piece of paper and gave it to me. I thanked him profusely, and I jumped in my rental car and I hightailed it back to the hotel so I could call Gary. You may wonder why I didn't call him on cell phone. Well, remember, this was 1986. Cell phones hadn't been invented. The internet had not been invented. CDs were just getting started. So this was, I'm showing my age now, I guess, but this was back in the mid 80s. So I get to my hotel and I call Gary Prim's number, got his answering machine. 30 minutes later, he calls me back and he says, Dave, this is Gary Prim. Can I help you? Yes, sir. I'd love to have you record a demo of a song for me. George Clinton says you do a wonderful job, and I wonder if you'd do that. He said, I'd be glad to do it. I said, what do you need? He said, well, all I need is a recording of you playing it so I can tell what it sounds like, and I need a lead sheet. And I said, okay, I can do the recording part, but what's a lead sheet? I didn't even know the language of the music industry in Nashville at this point. He said, oh, it's just the melody and the chords written out on a piece of paper. I said, okay, Gary, I've got that. I just didn't know to call it a lead sheet. So I got back home after that weekend and mailed him the lead sheet and the cassette tape of me playing Rachel's song. And 2 weeks later, on August the 22nd, 1986, at 6 p.m., I meet Gary Prim at this little studio across the street from the music mill. And he comes walking in with his Yamaha DX7 synthesizer under his arm. And I meet him, friendly guy, wonderful, very instant, one of those people you just instantly like. So he comes in, sets his synthesizer down, and he sits down at this baby grand Yamaha piano that's in the studio there and starts warming up a little bit. And I go into the control room where the engineer is, and pretty soon Gary says, I'm ready, let's do it. So push record, and Gary starts playing my song. Now remember, I had never heard my song played by anybody else but me. So I had no idea, Pete, what I was going to hear. This is going to be his arrangement of my song. So I'm kind of at his mercy at this point. I couldn't believe what my ears were hearing. It was fantastic. It's like if you had you wrote a little violin piece and got Yitzhak Perlman to play it for you. Oh, whoa. It's just to be amazing. So anyway, I'm not believing what I'm hearing. He gets partway through the song and he stops. He said, rewind that. Let's start back. I can do better than that. So rewound the tape, start all over. This time, he plays the whole Rachel song all the way through to the end. No mistakes. There was no flubs anywhere. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Well, I would have been extremely ecstatic if he had stopped right then and said, well, that's it. And that would have been the end of it. But nope. Gary says, nope, I've got some more plans for this song. We're going to make it sound fantastic. He said, I'm going to add in there some electric piano parts that parallels the real piano. He called it doubling. He was going to double the piano. So he puts on the headset, and we take 2 more tracks on the recorder, and he records some electric piano sounds from his synthesizer to match what he played on the piano. Sounded wonderful. And then he said, okay, this song, it needs some bottom and some top. And what he meant by that was some more fill-in sounds. So he said, I'm going to put some low strings on the bottom end of it. I'm going to put some high strings up on the top end. So 2 more tracks, record the low strings. 2 more tracks, record the high strings. And then in the middle of the song, after playing the verse and the chorus twice, he did something that I was not expecting, but it was absolutely fantastic. And that was he instantly changed the key of the song from C up a half a step to C sharp. No modulation, just all of a sudden, bam, bam, you're there. And I call it a musical surprise, one of those things that just catches you, by surprise. It makes you smile. It makes you just go, your energy level goes up. And he said, I'm going to put some horns there toward in the middle there about where I changed keys. And so he did that. Well, got all that done, come into the control room, and he said, I think that's all it needs. We mixed it all, set it all up so we could listen to all of it together. And he says, I like it. And I said, I love it. This is far exceeds anything I ever dreamed that this song could sound like. So I wrote him a check for the agreed upon fee, and he packed up his synthesizer and out the door he went. And I didn't know whether I would ever see Gary Prim again in my life or not. But it turns out that I would. He and I went back in the studio over the years and recorded over 170 songs. I wrote 120 of them myself. And so having spent over 15 years, at least a week a year with Gary in Nashville, we became just the closest of friends. And he and his wife, Julie, and their 2 kids, they're more like family than anything else, but just wonderful, wonderful people. And what a musician. Gary is just, if you ever get a chance to hear Gary Prim play anywhere, anytime, on any album, and he's played on a lot of albums, you got to listen to Gary. He is magnificent. But that recording that night was kind of like the playing of Rachel's song at the christening service. This recording of it was another monumental keystone in my life that really changed my future forever.
What did you learn from that, Dave?
Well, I learned for sure that I'm fairly gifted at writing music, but I learned to appreciate the true gifts of being able to perform music as well. These professional musicians, and Gary is just one of probably thousands, if not millions of others that are so gifted and talented that they can use their talents to make a simple song sound fantastic. So I learned to not rely upon my own gifts to basically to bring into my circle of friends and people and what I'm doing, other people that are more gifted than I am in other fields, and that really applies to any kind of business. You need to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are, that are more gifted than you are, and make that team as strong as it can be, rather than relying solely on yourself. That realization, I think, was part of the main lesson I got out of that, was that having Gary perform my music and letting him express his creativity without me trying to confine him. No, I wanted it to be in this key, and no, don't change key. I did not try to micromanage his performance at all. I let him create. And that's probably another good lesson, is that when you're letting people in their environment where they're really good at something, us folks that tend to be micromanagers, we need to learn to back off and let that person let them shine, let them do their thing, and not interfere. But there's a lot of parallel lessons, I think, in there, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, just as you're speaking there, I mean, it's that to have the foresight to stand aside, because so many people they take the creative aspect and then they want to hold on to it, whereas actually there's more power in letting it go and handing it into somebody else that's their flow state, their passion, right? So it's getting the hell out of your own way, I think, is what I'm hearing. Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah. Because that as your podcast has fire in the belly, it's not just your belly that has the fire in it. It's the fire in the belly of the people that you're working with. In my case, I had a wonderful musician in Gary Prim. I had a wonderful recording engineer in Ronnie Light, my recording engineer. His ear and his idea for putting things together were always just spot on, and letting them have their input into the process was so critical.
Hmm. What, I mean, you talked about flow state and that sort of sitting down, and the time you say you described there is almost like a stress reliever, that sort of, relieving and doing all that. I mean, do you feel the music? Do you just go in the flow state? Or what's your method, and how do you come across with things like that?
Well, I've thought a lot about that, Pete, because I have a degree in mathematics, minor in physics, worked in the computer center 4 years, was a computer programmer. I've been in technology all my life. So as you can probably guess, I'm a very left brain oriented, analytical kind of person, have that tendency. And you would think, well, how in the world would somebody with that tendency also be creative on the other side, where it's really right brain functions that are doing the creativity? And I've thought about that a lot, because it's almost like I have to get to a place where I almost flip a switch. When I sit down at the piano, if I really try to think about what I'm playing, it doesn't sound very good at all. I mean, it's very mechanical. And it's like when I took piano lessons, you had to play exactly what was on the sheet of music, and it was just so mechanical. And if you've ever been to little kids' piano recitals, please take your earplugs, because most of them, it's not very pleasant to listen to. But then occasionally, you'll see a little kid step up to the piano, and he plays music. It's not the notes he's playing. He's making music and putting feeling into the song and all that, the emotions. And what a contrast versus somebody that's just bam, 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 playing just notes in a very harsh rhythm. So for me, I have to get myself out of my analytical left brain side of my head and into the more relaxed right side and creative side. And for me, somehow or another, the sound of piano music kind of does that to me. I can sit down at the piano and just play nothing but, I'll just hit one chord, and I'll just sit and listen to it ring for a minute or so. It'll ring in the piano for a long time. And it's that, if you really listen to it, for those that play an instrument, they know what I'm talking about, is you can just kind of just close your eyes and let that sound and that music come into your soul almost, and it almost transforms you brings you into the music. And it's those kind of things that I think is what transforms me from being super analytical to being creative. When I sit there and I just play something that sounds good. Well, that sounds good too. And I kind of lose myself into the music. And that's kind of how my creativity starts, is with me and the piano having a conversation, is kind of the way I put it.
I mean, do you drive the music, or does the music drive you? Which is it?
Oh, I think it's kind of a little bit of both. Sometimes it's a happy accident, like if I'm playing something and I hit what quote was a wrong note that I didn't really intend to hit, but in hindsight it said, "Oh, well, that sounded pretty good." Then you go and you work around that. So sometimes you can massage a tune or a melody. You can work on it and make it sound good. Or sometimes you sit down, like I did with Rachel's song, played the whole thing, didn't even have to think about anything. It just was there. So it's a little bit of both, I think.
So from that, I mean, that sort of, that exposure, I mean, did that then set off? Because I mean, you're still working at this point. You've still, you've gone and you've got this recorded. But at what point did you actually start sort of stepping into this more and more, and really sort of taking it more seriously, if you like?
Well, when I got back home after recording Rachel's song, of course, the first thing I had to do was play it for my wife, because, again, this was 1986. I didn't have any way to play it for her over the phone. She had never heard it before till I got home. Played it for her. I probably kissed her hello, and then we went straight to the stereo, and I said, "You got to hear this." So we sat down on the couch and listened to Rachel's song, and it just literally moved us beyond imagine. And I played it for everybody that I could find that would listen to it. And one of the people that I played it for was a dear friend by the name of Bob McHone, who was a wonderful radio announcer And he had a Saturday morning radio program where he played big band jazz music and just would talk about the orchestra and all the things about the song and play it. And so I was having lunch with my friend Bob, I think it was on a Wednesday, and I was telling him about Rachel's song. And he said, well, Dave, I've got to hear this. So I said, okay, well, he said, let's go to my office and play it on. He had a boom box there in his office we could play it on. So we go to his office and he puts the cassette tape in, and Bob is sitting there. I can still see him today, sitting there right close to the speaker so he could hear it really well. He's got his eyes closed and he's listening to Rachel's song as it plays. And then I hear this sound that you'll recognize as the universal approval sound. It's it just was, he was just taken in by the song, and by, pretty soon he had tears in his eyes. And when it finished, he looked at me and he says, Dave, that song, Rachel's song, will be a standard. He said, and you have got to let me play it on my radio show. I said, okay, Bob, but all I have is this reel-to-reel master tape. That's it. It's a 1/4-inch tape, and if that gets gone, that's the end of that recording. So he said, I'll take good care of it. So he took it to the radio station. They made a copy, and he played it that Saturday morning on the radio, his radio show. And Linda and I were at home, and of course I had my tape recorder running so I could record it. And I still have that recording of Bob's announcing my song and hearing it first time ever on the radio. And so he played it, and then after, we were all excited about hearing my music on the radio. And then the phone rings, and it's the station manager at the KEZK radio station. And he said, Dave, he said, I got to tell you, he said, I've been in radio for over 20 years, and this has never happened to me before. He said, when Bob played Rachel's song, he said, our phone bank over here with about 10 or 12 phone lines lit up. Every line was busy. People calling in saying, what is that song you just played? Tell me more about Rachel's song. Tell me more about this guy in Winston-Salem, Dave Combs. And so he said, you've got something, boy. He said, you have got really a special song. And I said, well, thank you very much. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to do with it, but I'm going to take off with it. He said, well, you better. So that was another one of those things that kind of lit another fire in our belly. It says, okay, Dave, you got to get this thing on the radio. Well, how do you do that? I didn't know for sure. All I knew was that I probably needed to call some radio stations and first of all, need to find out where they were, because this was an easy listening radio station. Now, we don't have that kind of an animal much here in the United States anymore. I think there may be 4 or 5 still easy listening format stations in the whole country. But back then there were about 400. Well, I got a list of all of those from a publication called Radio and Records, R&R. They would sell you the list of all the book that had all the radio stations in the whole country. Well, by format. So I had all the easy listening stations, their phone number. I would call them and speak to the program director and tell him what I had. And he'd say, well, send me a record. And by the way, at this time, I did go back and get a 45 single record made of Rachel's song. Now, some of your listeners won't even know what that is, but it's the old vinyl record with the big hole in the middle that ran at 45 RPMs. And they called it a 45. So I had a 45 record made of Rachel's song. So I started sending these 45 records out to the program directors, these radio stations. They all loved it. They all played it. And then some of the stations that I called would tell me, we don't do our own programming. It's done for us by a company in Chicago called Bonneville Broadcasting. And so we pay them to do our programming for us. I said, okay, well, let me have that phone number. So I called Bonneville Broadcasting and got a hold of the program director, or the program director for easy listening stations. And I can't remember his name at the moment, but he loved Rachel's song. I sent it to him, and he loved Rachel's song. And he let me know real quick that he was going to put it in rotation on all the stations that they programmed. So I went from just a handful of radio stations. All of a sudden, my music was played on about 200 easy listening stations all over the country. So I kept at it, and I eventually got Rachel's song played on all 400 stations all over the whole country. It became and was on the charts. It made the charts. It was number one or in the top of the easy listening instrumental charts on like Los Angeles and Chicago, St. Louis, Atlanta, New York, Baltimore, all these places. Rachel's song was right up there. And that was another eye-opening where I realized that, I better keep this fire in my belly going here, because this is really something. And now what do I need to do? Well, next thing I know, I start getting mail, fan mail, something I never got in my life. Here's a letter addressed to me from somebody I didn't even know. And they were telling me how much they loved my music, how much Rachel's song meant to them, and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. So now I got to figure out, how am I going to take advantage of this? Now I have my MBA from Wake Forest University here in Winston-Salem. So I'm a business person. I'm also analytical, and I can connect two dots. And those two dots said, hey, this person wants my music, and I've got to find a way to get it to them. Boom, got to connect those two. So I didn't have any music to sell to them. I got busy and wrote some more music. And I went back to Nashville, hooked up with Gary Prim again, and we did our first album. And of course, it's called Rachel's Song, and it has the first 7 songs that I ever wrote are on this album, and they're all instrumental. And so then, this was 1988, and by then CDs were starting to take hold. Well, CD was a great format compared to cassette tapes, because the quality of the music was just superb compared to a tape. So I got CDs made of Rachel's Song. I think my first order was like a minimum order of 500 or something like that. And I thought, how in the world am I ever going to sell 500 CDs of Rachel's Song? Well, I found out that it wasn't going to take very long, because all these people were writing to me, wanted to buy it. And so I started selling the CDs to the people, and I think I sold them to them for $14 a piece, and they didn't hesitate to pay that for the CD. And cassette tapes were also big back then too, so I had cassette tapes as well as CDs. Sold more tapes than I did CDs in the beginning. So that was the beginning of the business model side of things here, where I was figuring out how I could turn myself into an entrepreneur here and do something with my music as a music business. Now, the problem was, where am I going to sell my music on a retail? I wanted to sell it through a retail establishment as well. I didn't want to just depend on people hearing it on the radio and writing to me. And that was okay. Several hundreds of those were happening, but I wanted it to be on a big scale. So I thought, well, I'll go to our record stores. Now, you may remember we used to have record stores. There's the vinyl record stores are making a comeback of sorts, but back then you bought your music at a record store. You didn't go to Walmart. I don't even think Walmart was open back then, but you didn't go to the big box department stores to get music. You bought it at a record store. We had one in North Carolina, and it was called the Record Bar, and I approached them about carrying my music in their stores. They wouldn't give me the time of day. They'd never heard of Dave Combs. They didn't like instrumental music, first of all. All they wanted was country and rock and roll. And so I got nowhere. So that was one of those roadblocks that you run into as an entrepreneur. You think you're going to go really good, and boom, you hit this wall. Well, I figured my philosophy has always been, you either go over it, under it, around it, or through it. That's my philosophy about a wall. So I decided there's got to be another way. And I'd like to take credit for this myself as being a brilliant idea that I came up with all by myself, but it's not true. Almost by accident. I was working at AT&T at the time in Bethesda, Maryland. And a lady whose office was right beside mine had a good friend who owned a gift shop in Old Town Alexandria, Virginia. Now, for those of you that have been to Alexandria, Virginia, know it's a wonderful tourist town with shops and restaurants. It's right on the Potomac River. It's a beautiful place to visit. Well, Jane, my co-worker's friend, Jane, owned this gift shop. And so she wanted to give her a CD of Rachel's Song. And I said, okay, sure. So I gave her one to give to her. Didn't think much about it. In about a couple of days, my phone rings, and it's Jane, the owner of this gift shop. And she says, Dave, you don't know me, but Leslie gave me one of your CDs, and I've been playing it, and I need some help. She said, every time that song goes on my CD player in my shop, everybody in the store comes over at the counter and says, hey, what's that song? Do you have it for sale? I want to take it home with me. And she said, I don't have it, so can you help me out? So we reached an agreement on wholesale price, because I'd never sold it at wholesale before. This was brand new to me. So I'm still learning the ropes on how to sell something wholesale. So we reached an agreement. She said, can you bring me some tonight? I said, sure. After I get off work, I'll bring you a box of them. So we got home. Linda and I went and took a box of CDs and cassette tapes to Old Town Alexandria, to this gift shop. Now, the name of the gift shop is called America. And she sold everything patriotic. If it was red, white, and blue, she sold it in that shop. And she played patriotic music on her CD system. She would play John Philip Sousa kind of music, all those patriotic songs, and had a great sound system. Sounded really great. And then she also had one of these 5 CD changers, and one of those 5 was Rachel's song. And every time Rachel's song came on, boom, everybody over to the counter. So I took her that box of CDs and tapes and left them with her. I thought, well, this will be interesting. 2 days later, phone rings. Jane, Dave, can you bring me some more? And tonight, I am sold out. I didn't order enough. How about doubling the order this time? So, sure enough, Linda and I boxed them up back down to Old Town Alexandria, give her the tapes and CDs of Rachel's song, and then we go to a great restaurant and have a great dinner, and then come back home. So we made that trip every week for over a year, and Jane sold thousands of tapes and CDs out of that one little gift shop. And that was when my MBA and my business modeling mind kicked in, and I said, aha, this is where I need to concentrate on selling my music. So, because I made myself a spreadsheet. Being a computer person, I was going to do it right. Spreadsheet. All right. Here's the column that says how many tapes I sold her, how many CDs I sold her, here what it cost me, and here's what she paid me. And you do the arithmetic, and down at the bottom is my gross profit. Okay. And I thought to myself, okay, what if we could only find one gift shop like that in every state? Let's just do 50. Okay. Column 2 is column 1 times 50. Well, this bottom line number is looking more interesting, because, the gross profit on a CD was, it cost me maybe $1.50, sold it to her for $7, and she sold it for $14. So she made a lot of money, and I made a lot of money on each one. The gross margin is really important. So column 2, 50 times. Oh, that's an interesting. Well, what if let's don't get greedy. Let's just do 5 gift shops in every state. Surely to goodness, out of this big country, there's 5 gift shops in every state. Column 3 is 250 times column 1. Linda, come here. I want you to see this number at the bottom of this spreadsheet. Looky here. This is 3 times what I make at work. And she said, what? I said, yes, ma'am. And she says, well, we know what we got to get doing. we got to find these other 250 gift shops just like Jane's. And so that was when the fire got up to a really hot level in my belly at that point, because I knew, it doesn't take a genius to figure out when something really works on a small scale. If you can duplicate that and multiply it, that's a business model to die for. It takes the guesswork out of it. You've already ironed out all the wrinkles in the small model. I guess it's basically the franchise model, right? And that's what you do with a franchise. You get a thing that works really good, you duplicate it all over the place. Well, I ended up with over the years, and it took me, and how I did it's another long story. I don't think we have time to go into it here, but in my book, I outline how I went from that one gift shop to over 1,000, not 50 or not 250, 1,000 gift shops over the entire country. You couldn't go in a tourist town in the United States without running into my music somewhere. And that's where my business model enabled me to quit my job at AT&T in 1992 and do nothing but my music from that point on.
Two questions. How do you feel about that now, looking back and reflecting, and what have you learned?
Well, for number one, I have no regrets about that, leaving my full-time career at AT&T. And I guess, back then that was a big deal. When I grew up, it was, if you got a job with a great corporation like Western Electric or General Electric or any of the Ford Motor Company, any of those big corporations, man, you better stick with that, because when you got your 40-year degree service, you got a great pension, and it was a great career. It was a great job. Well, times have changed. I mean, really changed now. But for me, when I had been at AT&T for 22 and a half years, 25 years is what I needed to have as a minimum to retire. And I was only 44. I needed to be at least 50 years old to retire. So what am I going to do? Sit there and work my way around and work at my job making X, while at home I'm making 3X, and just to get a pension paycheck that is probably going to be not even anything close to what I'm making with my music. So it was a fairly easy decision once I ran the numbers and saw what was happening and where it was going and the trends and everything, to basically had lunch with my boss one Monday morning and told him, I said, well, Bill, I can't afford to work here anymore. And he chuckled, because he knew about my music business. And he said, well, I wish I could do it too. But so I basically resigned and left my career and didn't even look back. And what I have learned, I think, is that for any young person that has the fire in their belly to do something, and if they've kind of proven that they're not just dreaming or they're on something, they need to know. You don't have to know 100%, but you got to have a pretty good idea. But once you have that really desire and that level of determination, that fire in your belly, don't look back. You can make your decision, move forward, and good things will happen. And as I heard somebody yesterday on, I think it was on a 60 Minutes thing, this chef that's making food for all the people in Ukraine, he was, one of his famous statements, they asked him, how do you do this? Don't you plan and everything? And he says, well, now, if I sat down for every hour that I'm planning on something, I could be out here feeding somebody. And so he says, there's one principle, and I really love the way he put it, was that you can never turn a vehicle left or right or any direction when you're sitting still. You have to be moving in order to be able to turn. And so I think that's a really good, and I love that analogy of you can't turn unless you're moving. You can sit in the parking lot and fiddle that steering wheel all day long and you're not going anywhere, right? But once you move, you can turn and go someplace. So I think for me, that deciding to move and to take action and not look back and have the confidence and affirmation, and really having heard letters from over 50,000 people, really confirmed that I was making the right decision too.
It's so powerful, and by the sounds of it, it sounds like Linda was behind you all the way here. She was, to have that support and that guidance as well. I mean, have I understood that correctly? Is that the way it is?
Yes, that's the understatement of the day. She is, still is, my wife Linda is an amazing lady. And I wish we had time to have her come down here and talk to you as well. My wife Linda is retiring next month as the state controller for the state of North Carolina. She will have done that position for the last 8 years. And so she has over 200 people that work for her in Raleigh. And for the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, her organization has worked remotely. They've all worked from home. Now, her organization does payroll for over 90,000 people. They ran the payroll from home. She has a call center of over 100 people that answer calls about payroll. They all work from home. Her entire organization went home when the governor announced the emergency declaration. She says, all right, grab your laptops and go home. And they had already practiced it. They had rehearsed this on her insistence because she had experience with this in Washington. She was the former controller of the United States in the White House in Washington previously. And so in her previous jobs, she had practiced this, what they call COOP, continuance of operations, where you go and exercise and you pretend like a disaster has happened and you work out the kinks of how you make it work. She had drilled that into her people in North Carolina before the pandemic, thank goodness. So when the pandemic came along, she said, all right, we practiced it, folks. This is for real. Go home. They didn't miss a lick, not one lick. And so, but she is retiring, thank goodness, at the end of June. It's a term appointment. She has to because her term is up at the end of June. But she is one remarkable lady, and she is a great encourager to me. And she's a great mentor to her people. She has, all these people that work for her in Raleigh, they love her. They absolutely, and she loves them. They're a great organization, and she loves teaching them the things that she's learned over the years and helping them become good leaders in their own right. And I think that's really important. And she's been a huge help to me with encouraging me, and sometimes, kicking me off the sofa sometimes, and I'd do something like writing the book. Last beginning of the pandemic, she says, what are we going to do? And she says, that book we've been talking about perhaps for years, all right, you're going to get off your butt on the bench and you're going to go write this book. And I did. And so it took about 9 months to get all the stories together and hire the editors and do all that process of publishing a book, that's an education in itself, but it was great. And so, but I have to say that was her idea too. So I hope she's upstairs now having a really good idea for something to eat for supper, but and she will. She's a great cook too. But anyhow, that's my better half.
What was your idea and your intention with the book?
Well, first of all, I wanted to memorialize these stories. I've been telling, I would speak to these, like Rotary or groups like that, and give them a program and tell stories about the writing of Rachel's song, the same stories that I've been telling you. And every time I would give one of these programs, people would say, well, you need to write a book of all these stories. And I've been told that for years and years. And so really, it was those stories and wanting to have that down in something that somebody that I didn't even know, much like what happened with Rachel's song. People heard it that I had no idea they were going to hear it. People will get my book, hopefully, and read it and find out and learn some things too, because it's a book not just about music, but it's a book about being an entrepreneur and how you work your way through an initial idea to make it into something big later on. So really my purpose in the book is really to help me tell the stories of my music and hopefully encourage people to also, with their curiosity, at least hopefully find Rachel's song and my other music and listen to it as well. So it's really a hand in glove with the music. They go together. So it's been really helpful so far. It's opened a lot of doors for those that are thinking about writing a book. If you're a public speaker or you're a performer of any kind, I think it's always helpful to have a book. If I run into somebody at the grocery store and we get to talking about life or music or whatever, I'll go out in the car and I'll get them a copy of my book and say, here, take this. I think this will be good for you to read. So it's a good thing to have as well. It's just, and I'm sure you found the same thing with your books.
Absolutely. I mean, there's those that have, and there's those that talk about it, right? And I'm just that you going into that studio the first time, it's saying it's definite. Think about this, talk about this in Think and Grow Rich. It's the definiteness of decision. It's following the lead. It's going into that studio. It's taking that step. It's talking to that person. It's asking the question. It's leading forward, right? And then, or you go, I don't know, there's too many to choose from, I'll just go home. So it's taking that decision, it's taking that action and that step forward, right?
Yes, got to take action. The key word is action. And inaction is, you're never going to get anything done if you're just kind of frozen in place. You got to take action.
What does bring you to a state of action? I mean, do you set goals for yourself? Do you try and produce a certain amount? Do you know, what's your routine and habits there, Dave?
Well, I've been working really hard at these podcasts to try to schedule as many of these each day as I can comfortably do. 3 or 4 is about the limit. But that's my main motivation right now, is just to make sure that and I've been using this Podmatch app that has been wonderful to help me get connected with the podcast hosts. And so keeping that booked, I keep myself booked. This is my book of upcoming podcasts. I've got about, I don't know, 25 or 30 already booked that yet to happen, and I've done over 60 already. But just that has really kept me going, because number one, it's energizing. I enjoy the heck out of meeting folks like you and the other hosts that I've dealt with. Many of those we still keep in touch. You know, there's a connection there that, you know, they're a new friend, so to speak. So it's really great. But my routine now is to try to keep as many of these podcasts booked as I can, that I can comfortably do without overbooking myself. And that's pretty much it.
I love that, because I mean, it's the story in you know, Chicken Soup for the Soul. They talk about that, you know, Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield, you know, and I've had Mark Victor Hansen on the show, and they talked about that. It's doing the 5 things every day. So it's like, it's doing the shows, it's the turning up, it's doing certain actions. Just, it doesn't have to be crazy. It just has to be persistent and consistent. It's just day in, day out. Yep. The fact that, you know, you're setting a goal and you're doing it every day, and you're doing all this, taking this action, and that is how you change things. You know, it's everyone you meet, you say, you know, it's about sharing the song, it's about sharing the album, it's putting it forward consistently, right? You know,
that's right. You know, Jack Canfield wrote the foreword to my book. I got to know him a couple of years ago, and he has been a huge supporter of mine and very much an encourager and a mentor with my book. And you know, without his encouragement, I'm not sure how far this book would have gone, but he was kind enough to write the foreword to my book. And he still keeps tabs on me and wants to know how are you doing, and are you still moving ahead. So, but his principles that he wrote, and I keep this right close to me, this little book, the Success Principles by Jack Canfield, this is a PhD in entrepreneurship and business in a book. Anybody that wants to learn how to do something and succeed, that's one of the must-read books that you got to have. But Jack is a wonderful, wonderful encourager.
Isn't it amazing, you know, the people who are, you know, that sort of the book, and it's a fabulous book. I totally agree. It's an amazing book, and all the habits but even still, even being at that level, the amount of encouragement they give back, the amount of service, the amount of contribution. And it's the same with your songs and your music, right? I mean, I was interested because you call it your music, and is there a point that it becomes not your music, it's the people's music, it's the universe's music, or will it always be or originate through you?
Well, that's a good question. I really hadn't thought much about that, but I hope that, and I expect that my music will long outlast me. When I'm gone, I think and I hope that my music will still be being played somewhere around the world, because it seems to be timeless. Genres and people's favorite kinds of music change over time, but also things kind of go in cycles. And you know, who knows when the instrumental, soothing, relaxing kind of music, they used to be called elevator music, will make a return. You know, but it still has an effect, a positive effect on people, and it's just that it's not going to be your loud, boisterous music that you would hear in a restaurant or a bar or someplace where they're trying to just basically blast you out of the room with noise, kind of. But for those that want to listen to music in a quiet setting, I think this kind of classical music, or whether you like country or bluegrass or the blues, any of the kinds of jazz music is just great to listen to. And I hope that my music will be still played and enjoyed for centuries to come. And whether it's known as my music or not, but that's really not my. I'm not on an ego trip of wanting everybody to say, well, that's Dave Combs' music, but I do want them to have the opportunity to hear it and enjoy it.
Just interesting. I mean, talking about the success principles now for you and where you're at and all the experience and the amazing things you've achieved. I mean, what is your definition of success?
Well, I kind of measure my success in the number of lives that I can feel that I can touch through my music. Now, I have a very limited way of gauging that these days by the fact that people don't write letters much anymore, and plus it's harder to find out who I am or how to get a hold of me if all you hear it is on a podcast or on Pandora, and it's just one of the next 3 or 4 songs, and it's there and it's gone. It's not like the older days where you could call the radio station and ask what that song was. But I just, knowing that there's millions of people, I get reports every month from Spotify and Apple Music, all the streaming platforms, of how much each song has been streamed each month, and it's in the hundreds of thousands. And sometimes in the millions. And so that alone, I think, is, to me, enough confirmation that if it's been heard that many times, then I know deep down at least a small percentage of those are really going to be touched by the music in a significant way. And even though I probably will never know exactly, but it's just a comfort to me to know that it's still out there, it's being played, it's been heard. And the fact that the musicians don't make very much money from streaming these days, which is a kind of a bone of contention for us musicians. Just as a side, do you know how many times a song has to be streamed for me to get 1 penny of a royalty?
I would hate to guess and say it's probably maybe 100.
No, it's not that big, but it's 5. A song has to be streamed 5 times for me to get 1 penny. So you stop and think about that. For, let's say the average song is 3 minutes. That's 15 minutes of my music playing, and that it was my creativity that created it. It was my money that recorded it. It's my intellectual property, and they're enjoying it for 15 minutes, and I get 1 penny. And that is the issue that you'll hear all over and over. It comes up often in the amount of royalties and payments from the intellectual property to the musicians, to the creators of music. And we got a long ways to go, I believe, to make it a fair compensation for the people who create the music. And for people entering in the music business this day and time, to do what I did in the late 80s and 90s is virtually impossible today with the technology and the payment schemes that are in place today. Number one, you cannot buy an automobile hardly that has a CD player in it. It's all streaming electronic music. CDs are the thing of the past, pretty much. Cassette tapes died a long time ago. Vinyl records are making somewhat of a comeback to that small segment of the music buyer. But by and large, it's the ways of offering the music to people have been so controlled now by the media and the big electronic internet connected outfits that it is very, very difficult to make a living with music these days, unless you're a star performer and doing performances at a venue and selling out tickets for your performance. It's very, very difficult.
I mean, that's it, right? I mean, the route to market, and it's the same for business, same for everything. It's the same, but it's different. I mean, the success principles, so many things, there's so many activities and actions we can take, but actually the route to market could be very different. And it's good. I mean, some of it will be better, some of it not so much, but who knows, right? It's just different.
Yes, yes.
What are you capable of, Dave, out of interest, you know?
Uh, Ask me again. Elaborate on what you're asking.
What's your potential?
Oh, my potential. Well, I think the potential is probably, you could say unlimited, but it's very much dependent upon the actions that I take and also the actions that occur along the way. For example, I could be on a trend now, making X amount of money with my music or whatever, or getting it exposed a certain number of thousands of plays a day. But suppose that by some chance, some person was watching this podcast, somebody like maybe an Oprah Winfrey or a Dolly Parton or some NBC Good Morning America or ABC Good Morning America or CBS Sunday Morning. Somebody producer says, well, I think we need to put Dave Combs on the program and talk about Rachel's song and his music. Well, you know what would happen there. It's the same story that you've heard about all the authors that got their book supported by my Oprah Winfrey. They go from an unknown author to an instant New York Times bestseller. So it's those kind of things. And I think when you interviewed Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield, they talk about you don't try to pick your people that you talk to about your music. Like you don't know which podcast or which appearance that you do is going to make a connection that makes a difference. You do them all, you just keep at it. So and to answer your question, I think the potential is unlimited, but I think that the control of how you get to that point is somewhat out of my control. It's going to be up to some circumstances that may or may not happen, but they certainly won't happen if I don't take action to move to the next step. But I don't know when that next step is going to lead to something, but I'm just going to keep at it, and with the faith that by some time or other it'll be like what happened to Rachel's song. It got played on the radio, people heard it, they loved it, and all of a sudden it had a life of its own. So your businesses, your products, your whatever you're trying to promote can take on a life of its own that is almost out of your control at some point. It just goes. But something, as we used to say, it went viral. Well, that just means that a lot of people told a lot of people who told a lot of people about something, and eventually you get in some big numbers. So I'm hoping that maybe eventually, someday, that my music and perhaps my book will also go viral or be at least in some way promoted by powers beyond my control at this point. But I'm going to keep at it and keep pressing on and keep moving forward.
Do you believe in luck or fate, or what's your perception of the universe?
Well, there's a little book that a fellow by the name of Squire Rushnell wrote called When God Winks. If you don't know about this little book, it's a great little read. He used to be an executive, I think, with ABC Good Morning America. He's a very well-known producer in the media. But he wrote this little book, When God Winks, and it's full of stories of how things happen to people that upon hindsight could not have been accidental. That when you met that person and that person turns out to be the turning point in your life, what are the odds of that happening purely by accident? And so, in answer to your question, my book is full of these stories, many of which have what I call the God winks. Is when I look back on the story of the thing that happened that made something really work well, the circumstances that led up to that were no accident. They could not have been. They had to have been planned and guided by a greater power than me. It had to be when God winked at me. And some of them, I call them God's shouts at me, because he really turn my direction in because of an event or something that happened. So in terms of, do I believe in luck? There is such a thing as chance, just pure flipping a coin and how many times it's going to come up heads or tails. But then in life, there are things that happen to you and for you and with you that I believe are part of a bigger plan that God has for your life. And in my case, it was a lot of things, and he's not done with me yet. So I have no idea what's coming up with when God winks at me again. But those kind of things are really important to me, and I think your audience would probably, in their own lives, whether it's how they came to meet their spouse, the person they married and spent the rest of their life with, or whatever great thing happened in their life, some business partner shows up that makes their business go really, really well. Those kind of things, maybe there's a God wink there that it wasn't pure circumstance that happened.
It's that aspect, isn't it? So it's the more you show up and the more you try and the more action you take, the luckier you get. It's that aspect, isn't it?
That is absolutely correct. And I heard somebody said you make your own luck.
It's always interesting, isn't it, when you say to people, it's like, oh, you're just lucky. It can be great, but it also can be very insulting for people and saying, yeah, that's sort of taking away the time, the effort, the risks, the attempts, the failures, the getting back up again, right? That's so to wipe it all out with just saying it's luck. It's different, right?
Yeah, I guess Thomas Edison you could say he was lucky to have invented the light bulb, but he also found 999 ways it wouldn't work before he finally found one that did. So it wasn't so much luck, it was moving ahead and taking action and being persistent and never, ever giving up.
I mean, and I love that story, and you sort of go, are you pretty sure on the 900th time his wife or partner or somebody, a next door neighbor, was saying he's mad?
Probably, yeah.
waste so much time on that, and it's never going to work, and all that. He's going to have full of naysayers. Everyone, right, till the day that actually it's the one, and then suddenly, boom.
Yep.
He's lucky.
Yep.
You say it takes a lifetime to become an overnight success.
That's very well put. Yes.
It's amazing. What do you see this as? As you say, I mean, it's sort of music. I mean, is it generational? Is it something that you'd sort of hand down almost to next generations? Is it something there that almost a legacy? Do you think?
Well, I've thought about that a little bit too, and that I hope that some of my inspiration through, for example, my book, the stories in there, if it helps to inspire some young person to keep practicing their musical craft or whatever, and encourage them to not give up on their music, that's a kind of a legacy that I would be really happy with, is even though it wouldn't be directly connected with me necessarily. Like Linda and I, we have no children, so there's no legacy of one of my offspring becoming a musician or whatever. But that's not to say that I can't be an encourager for other young folks that when they approach me and want to talk about their music and what should they do, I will spend as much time as I need to with a young person to help them keep encouraged with their music and pursue it. I'm on the board of advisors for the dean of the School of Music at Appalachian State University, and have been since 1994. And through that, we have sponsored scholarships for many young students at Appalachian in the music department, and that purpose is to encourage them and to give them some support and help getting through their music degree. And through that process, we've gotten to know some of those musicians and young people, and many of them go on to be music teachers in high school, or music directors or teachers, and it's just rewarding in that aspect. So anytime I can encourage anybody with pursuing their music either as a hobby or even as a career, especially when you run into somebody who is obviously a real talent. Sometimes, you see a young kid that just is a gifted, super gifted person, and that's the one that you want to see just have every opportunity they can to grow as a musician and become that superstar someday, and knock it out of the park on America's Got Talent or something, one of those things. But you need to encourage people, and I hope that my music and that my book can do that.
And that's, I mean, what a legacy to encourage and to, your fellow man. And I can't remember who said it. It's like to encourage others without potentially knowing the result of the impact. Is that not ultimate service? Is that not,
Mm-hmm.
Without the recognition or without the advice?
Yep.
You make a ripple in the pond, and who knows? I mean, that's it's beautiful in itself.
Yep.
I mean, do you play any other instruments, or is Dave a piano man through and through?
Pretty much the piano, but I have, you can see on the other side back here, that's a synthesizer keyboard. My wife and I play the piano and the synthesizer together quite often just to have fun. And even from a young kid, I picked up the guitar and learned how to play chords on the guitar. I'm not a guitarist by any stretch of the imagination, but at least it taught me the structure of the chords and the chord progressions. And I love to listen to wonderful guitar music, and I'm always amazed by people who can play that instrument very giftedly. I have a high school friend, in fact, he's on one of my albums, Stan Moon, who's a great guitarist, lives in Lexington, Kentucky, and is it Lexington or Louisville? Louisville, Kentucky. And he is a great guitarist and just a gifted musician. And of course, there's Gary Prim. He taught himself pretty much how to play the piano. He took lessons like I did for a couple of years as a kid, but the rest of it, Gary kind of taught himself how to play by just being around good musicians and learning and time on the instrument and practice, and he has become really very proficient at it.
Yeah, it's what do you listen to out of interest? What's your go-to in the music world?
Well, I love the music of the 60s. I love doo-wop music because it's music I can usually sit down at the piano and turn on whatever it's playing. I can play right along with it, at least the chords, once I know what key it's in, because most of them are, it's a C, A minor, F, and G kind of chord progression. It's fun to play along with because those songs are great. They got a great rhythm. They're just super fun to play along with. So I love the doo-wop. I love jazz. Now, I am not a jazz player at all. I wish I did have that gift of being able to improvise and play jazz, but I love to listen to it. It's just so wonderful to appreciate all the wonderful music that these musicians can create just seemingly out of thin air. You won't find them reading music as they're playing. They're just playing right out of their head, kind of thing. I love to listen to piano. I love to listen to vibraphone. I love vibe music. I love organ. I love choral music. I'm a former choir director. I love conducting choirs as they perform the music. And in fact, my wife and I wrote an entire cantata one year for our church, and that was quite a fun thing to do. And when we had over 100 musicians that I got to direct, and we packed the church with over 900 people on a Sunday afternoon for the performance of it, to celebrate the 125th anniversary of our church. And it's called The Temple of God. And you can watch it on my YouTube channel. I have a video recording of the entire cantata on my YouTube channel, which is just Combs Music, COMBS Music, all run together on YouTube. But it's called The Temple of God. But that was a thing that my wife and I wrote. She wrote the words and I wrote the music to the cantata.
It's a beautiful connection, isn't it? I mean, have that and to give it's something special, very special.
Yes, it was.
Tell me, what's a bit of a guilty pleasure for Dave then? What would we find you doing if you're not working as such?
I love to play table tennis, and I love to shoot pool. I have a pool table and a table tennis down here in the basement. And let's see, what else? I love to go bicycle riding on the Greenway. You'll find some on my YouTube channel. You'll find some videos of me riding my bicycle on the Greenway, and I put the bicycle ride and put my music playing underneath it and make a video of you can go for a bike ride with me and listen to my music. And I love to eat, like we all do, I think. But anyway, and let's see, what else do I like?
When you talk about guilty pleasures, so many people talk about wine or chocolate or.
Yeah, I'm a chocoholic, and I'm not much into wine, but I do love chocolate, and it loves me too. I have to work at that.
Hey, listen, if it takes a lot of time and effort to put it there, so don't try and shake it off too quick, you know?
That's right. Yep.
Well, tell me, Dave, I mean, if you were to try and summarize your fire in your belly in one or two words, what would they be?
Musical inspiration. I think I am inspired by music, and I think my inspiration also kind of results in more music. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship between my music and inspiration, and it's music has always inspired me, and whether it was going to watch the movie Sound of Music and sitting there with tears in your eyes watching and listening to beautiful music, or going to a beautiful concert, or going to hear the wonderful pianist Roger Williams in a concert, you know, how inspiring he was as a musician. And just music and inspiration are kind of the two key words that I think I would use.
Nice. It's beautiful to be able to create and enjoy, and yeah, there's so much to it. So, David, it's been wonderful having you on. Tell us, where can people get a copy of your book? Where can they find you? Where can they listen? Where can they track you down, hunt you down, stalk you? Any of the above?
Well, I've made it very simple for them. If you can remember my last name, Combs, Combs, go to my website, Combs Music, all run together, combsmusic.com. And on the website, on the left-hand side of the page, you'll see a picture of the cover of my book. And right below it will be a link that says, go to Amazon.com and you can purchase the book. Or you can, when you go there, it'll take you to the Amazon.com page for my book. You can get a paperback book copy. You can get an ebook Kindle. Or you can do an audio book on Audible. And there's also a look inside feature on Amazon, where if you click on that, you can actually, I think they put the first 2 chapters of my book in there. You can actually read the first 2 chapters of my book on Amazon. And then on the other side of my webpage is a picture of my CD, Rachel's Song. And right below it is a link that says go to Amazon.com. And you'll find a way to buy the CD. Or if you want to download the music as an MP3, you can buy the album or a song at a time. Or if you're an Apple Music subscriber, you can stream the music. So you can get the book or the music straight from my front page of my website. And right in the middle of my homepage, there's a link that says play Rachel's Song. Now, when you listen to Rachel's Song, I want you to listen to it hopefully in a quiet environment where you can hear it, all the subtleties in the recording, because what you're hearing is the original demo recording made in 1986, has not been remastered, remixed, anything. You're hearing exactly what I heard that night in 1986. And so, well, listen now that I've told you the story, listen for when the electric piano keys kicks in with the real piano, and listen for those low strings and high strings and the horns and the key change after the second verse. And I think you'll really have a deeper appreciation for the music when you do that. But yes, just go to my website, combsmusic.com.
Wow. Thank you. And fair play to you. You've made it very accessible. So that's awesome. So is there a final message you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
Well, I would just like to be encouraging to everybody to take time with your family and slow down a little bit in life and take time to, as they say, smell the roses and to listen to some good music and try to add some calm and peace and serenity into your life somehow or other through hopefully some of my music or other music that you enjoy.
Wonderful. Dave, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate all your sharing and your stories and really the experiences that you've had. So listen, thank you for the time and you've come on, and thank you for your service. So we appreciate you. Until the
Well,
next time.
thank you, Pete. I appreciate you having me on today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.